as the Utah season gradually draws nearer. The shortage of cash being experienced in most parts of the country is fast becoming a major source of concern and discomfort for many Nigerians. Presently, automated teller machines operated by commercial banks have been dispensing between 5,000 naira to 10,000 naira only, leaving many Nigerians at the mercy of point-of-sales operators who have taken advantage of the gap in the financial system to resort to charging higher rates across major towns and cities in the country. However, last week, the House of Representatives called on the Central Bank of Nigeria to immediately address the challenge of cash crunch in many commercial banks across the country. Joining us on this show as we look at the persistent cash crunch since the exit of former CBN Governor Godwin Emefiele is Dr. Paul Alaje, an economist. Dr. Alaje, it's good to see you again. Good morning. Well,
good morning, sir. Thank you so very much for having me.
Good morning. Please, can you help us make sense of the crisis that we face in Nigeria? When people go to the banks say they don't have money. When they try to use the ATMs, automated teller machines, they don't get enough money. If they now go to point-of-sales operators, they get money. Now the CBN or some commentator has said, oh, it's the rich people in Nigeria who are mopping up all the cash. And the CBN has threatened that fines, will be imposed and will be taken from the banks that may be responsible for this. Well, as an economist and somebody active in the financial sector, what really is the problem? And how do we address the problem?
Thank you once again for having me, Doctor, and the team. First, I understand that the cash crisis in Nigeria is started to look closely like what we experienced 2 years ago, or maybe I should say early part of last year, where Nigerians even took to street in some part of the country because of unavailability of cash. The central bank policy was partly responsible then, which is also still responsible now. Again, because of politics as of that time, 2023 election was in view as of 2022, even part of 2023. So politicians knows one of the ways with which they can win elections is to mop up cash and distribute to electorate on election day. Now, you might think that, oh, there is no election, so why do we seem to have cash crisis right now, this moment today? The point is that as we speak, policy as well as some decision is the reason why we have cash crisis. And a press statement was granted by an association of bankers, and they said that when it comes to sources of having cash in the bank, there are two sources. The first source is the Central Bank of Nigeria. The second source are the retailer. Now, for the Central Bank of Nigeria, which is one of their major sources, or perhaps the major source of getting cash, they are not able, according to them, the Central Bank is not able to meet the demand. So if Central Bank is not able to meet the demand and is the number one source of having cash with the bank, then perhaps we don't have so much blame to place on the bank. But Central Bank has responded. This was last week. Central Bank has responded very quickly, I think towards the end of the week, to say that you are giving cash you are giving cash to hawkers. So because you are giving cash to hawkers, the money is not circulating the way it should. As regulator, he has done the right thing to say that fine will be meted all the branches of the DMB, Deposit Money Bank, commercial bank, that has given cash to those in a manner with which it should not have been given. But so I can see this back and forth between commercial bank
Alaje,
and the Central Bank of Nigeria saying this it should be. But the real problem lies with policy.
Dr. Alaje, if you can hear me, sorry to interrupt you. We need to make some adjustments to the audio from your end. Just give us a minute and we'll be right back with you. Please stay with us. Welcome back to the morning show here on the Arise News channel. Our guest is still Dr. Paul Alaje, who's been addressing the cash crunch dilemma that many Nigerians face as they try to celebrate Christmas this year. Dr. Alaje, sorry for that earlier interruption. We're back with you now. If you may continue from where you were.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, where you stopped, yes.
Okay, so thank you so very much once again, and sorry for the breaking transmission. There are a number of reasons why central bank is saying that there is excess liquidity in the system. Anytime there's excess liquidity in the system, central bank will pick it and say this can induce inflation. As I speak with you, Nigeria is currently classified as a major inflator around the world, with inflation standing around 33.88%, according to the National Bureau of Statistics. To that end, central bank feels making policy to end inflation or to control inflation, making it single digit, is very important. But in an attempt to do that, central bank has not carefully analyzed the causes of inflation. Most of the time, central bank raises monetary policy rates, that is MPR, and adjusts all other rates in order to bring down inflation. But what I've seen from the former CBN governor, Godwin Emefiele, to the one that acted, and the current CBN governor, Mr. Cardoso, the three of them have tried to combat this stubborn inflation. But rather than inflation going down, it has maintained upward trajectory. In fact, IMF, about some weeks back, about 3 or 4 weeks back, have said that Nigeria need to rethink the policy because these policies have not been able to bring down inflation. So why do we have this stubborn inflation that will necessitate excess liquidity in the system? So instead of mopping it up, we need to have another strategy. We need to think differently to see what we can do. First is that under the last dispensation, we printed money worth $50 billion. We printed it in Naira without adding any money. So while Mr. Emefiele was wondering, why do we have so much cash? He printed money under ways and means. This printing of money will make the value of commodity to be the same, while the cost of buying would increase. So to my mind, it becomes too much money chasing fewer goods, because you have created money, you have really not added good to match with what you have created. So for people to buy camera, perhaps it was 1 million naira. Because we have created money, camera will suddenly become 2 million naira. To gauge your tire, 15 rims, and you now need to spend 500 naira as against 200 naira. The roadside vulcanizer may not want you to transfer such to him, which means you will make demand for more money. Sachet water that was previously 5 naira suddenly jumped to 10 naira because of that policy of printing more money, as if those were not enough. Under the current dispensation, even though we don't have significant printing of money, what we have was devaluation of the currency. Honestly, these are two monetary mistakes central banks are committing around the world, and it's not just Nigeria, committing, especially developing countries, just because we want to play the catch-up. We want our economy to be stable and attract some foreign direct inflows. Again, I refer them to economic history. Countries that have practiced the same thing and have had major setback in their economy, starting with Russia, to Germany, to Japan, until these three countries understood that we need to be decisive and fight for the soul of our economy. Unfortunately, poverty, deprivation, high inflation may not depart from them. You will see growth. We have seen Nigeria growth rate increase by over 3%, but we need to ask ourselves, which economy is growing? Economy of $500 billion or economy of $400 billion, or now an economy of merely $200 billion. So when you say we have growth, the question will be, which economy is growing? Back to the issue of too much money in circulation that we are not even seeing sufficiently. Here is the point. So if we continue to devalue Naira and say we want Naira to float, you are going to get to a point where people will need more cash in order to buy the same thing. So somebody who needed 50,000 Naira cash for commodities that perhaps they have challenges with transfer, or commodities that the volume are quite small and the sellers don't want to accept transfer, what do they do? They will look for cash anyway to buy the same. Again, we still have significant parts, and I want this to be verified, of our market system, especially agro sector, that is highly unbanked. As somebody who also operates in rice value chain, I can tell you that when you go to most of the rural community where we would buy a trailer of paddy for 9 million naira, remember, when you are buying paddy, In the farms, if you have cash, you pay 9 million. If you don't have cash, you pay 10 or 11 million. Today, the same size of paddy, it's about 15 million if you have cash. If you don't have cash, then it would increase to about 17, 18 million. Because the people that you are sending money to will use POS to collect the money in bits. So as much as cashless policy is beautiful, it should be encouraged. We have seen it in China, we have seen in some parts of the world, but it's not working here because we don't have sufficient infrastructure. I don't know which bank has issue. On my X page, that's Twitter, last week or so, I tweeted, I said, which bank are you dealing with or is dealing with you? And people started mentioning most of the banks that have either network challenges or other concerns. Remember that banks are not telco infraco. They also depend on telecom provider, network provider, for some of these functions to work. And when you check today, what is the cry that most network have? They are not charging an appropriate amount. Why? Because cost of living has increased. Why? Because Naira has been devalued. Why? Because when you look at policy, it appears that we are chasing our own tail.
Thank you so much for breaking it down for us. So where do we go from here? Because the picture you paint almost seems as if we're going to have to deal with this cash crunch for a while, you know, because policy hasn't changed. We still have the cashless policy. The infrastructure is not there. Even the CBN governor at the CIBN dinner had given a directive to banks to ensure that they had it. That doesn't seem to be working. If the CBN governor gives a directive and the banks are not adhering to it, there's a big problem there. The POS operators are still making a killing, if I can put it that way, with regards to the charges. We have reports of people who are withdrawing 10,000 Naira with 500 Naira, so are literally buying our money. So how do we proceed from here? Understanding where we are currently in terms of our infrastructure challenges and policy direction. Where do we go from here? Should Nigerians just brace up that this is what we have to deal with and this is the way and we should just deal with it?
Well, we have option in some areas there are no option. If our banking system network would improve sporadically and significantly, then you will see more transaction go off the cash and counter. It will go into the banking sector. Already we have seen significant improvement from cash transaction to non-cash transaction. And central bank is still using the volume to look at it, not knowing that if we are reporting, and I underline the word reporting, 33.88% inflation, we can measure the impact on an economy that should not have more than 6% inflation. Now, worst case scenario, inflation should scare us when it gets to 9%. But we have dwelled in this inflation for more than 2 years at double digit, and for over a year or so, or nearly a year, at 30%, more than 30% inflation. So for me, where should we go from here? First, we need to understand that the expected volume of money would increase in future. If we are not willing to get more cash, if we print, it's a dangerous way to go. We will now commit the first error in monetary economics, which is what will induce inflation. So because if you print more money without having value, then you will have challenge. And printing does not really mean you are printing money. Even when you create digital money without having value for it, you will be faced with inflation. So what do I think the central bank should do, or what should Nigerians do? For me, in the short term, I think the central bank will need to do something about flotation, because the origin, and those who cannot decipher things clearly will not be seeing the influence of flotation. I tell you, exchange rate is everything. Not just for Nigeria, for most developing countries that have high imports, exchange rate is everything. Check our balance of payment. It will explain better why, even though Bureau of Statistics is reporting balance of trade, that Nigeria seems to have more export than import in Naira terms. Check our balance of payment. How many remittances are we getting? Even though I've seen significant improvement on the part of central bank to boost the reserve to over $40 billion. But when you look at it, one thing I think we need to do is to see how to reorganize our flotation policy. If we cannot peg, we need to reorganize that policy. It's very important. Two, central bank, we need to make room for more allowance, because one, we're in festive period, we cannot allow cash crunch to happen at this time. We saw what happened last year, 2 years ago, around December to January. It's a very sensitive period for most Nigerian Christians and Muslims alike. Thirdly, why did we get here? We remember that in 2022, the then Central Bank Governor Emefiele said politicians have money that they are keeping. He didn't mention politicians, so let me quote him correctly. He said we need to change the color of money. Many persons felt, election is happening next year. Maybe it's to target politicians. Well, he never said that directly by himself. So I need to really correct that. So, but here is it. There is no major election happening next year.
Okay, my brother.
If we truly want monies that is owed in people's pocket to be returned to the government votes, to banks votes, this is the best time to do something about currency realignment. And I hope that central bank will not wait till August next year, because if you wait till August, it will certainly have impact on pre-election year in 2026. Again, what are we going to do about currency realignment? Are we maintaining the color? Are we bringing new currency all along? If we don't, then we will have more impact on us in 2026, because that will be pre-election year. And we know what happens pre-election year.
My brother Paul Alaje, I'm sure you can hear me. I think what you did not add to your analysis is the fact, and good to see you, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. And it's just what you forgot to even add to your analysis is that the CBN has an inflation target of 9%. We are way above that target. We did set an inflation target of 9% in this country. Today we are close to 34%. Secondly, all of these problems started in 2019 after the border closure. As at October 2019, inflation had spiked to 11.4% after the border closure. Since then, we have never found our way back. And we just keep making all these mistakes. Can we go back in time and rejig things?
Yeah, thank you so very much. I heard what you said regarding Nigeria's targets to 9%. I think that is maximum. Central bank target is 6 to 9%. Hoping the minimum will be 6, the maximum will be 9. I think I mentioned that in my earlier analysis. Donald Trump will be the president of the United States in January. Nigeria needs to be very wary. We made a big mistake when we shut borders, not knowing that the policy of Donald Trump will be America first. That's a good policy for Americans. But what is the impact on imported products? Prices increased by about 9 to 10% across all developing countries, LCDs. Happens less developing nation. It was everywhere for all of us. Donald Trump, I can bet you, will most likely bring tariff realignment to America. And when this happens, Nigerians and other developing countries should be ready to pay more. What will that mean for inflation? Inflation will be higher. So when we say, how do we retrace our step? I'm sorry. We seem to be playing a catch-up game, which may be too late. If we think that raising NPR will be sufficient to combat inflation, I tell you, it will only create unemployment, it will only create poverty, it will only create deprivation. I've said time and again that the strategy we are applying to end inflation, among other economic crises in Nigeria, is more theoretical than applied or applicable to our situation. The reason is because those who have written this in textbooks did not emphasize developing countries. They looked at an economy with proper structure, with proper system.
On that note, Dr. Alaje. Well, on that note, Dr. Alaje, we would like to thank you very much for joining us this morning on The Morning Show.